I declare the Council Agenda Briefing Forum of the 14th of February 2023, held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco and electronically via Zoom, open at 5:30 p.m. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. Please note this meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and by being present in the gallery you consent to the possibility that your image and voice may be published online. Okay, in addition to the 5 councillors seated around the table, Councillor Simon White is joining by Zoom, and Councillors Jennings and Hammersley are on approved leave of absence. We'll be assisted by our CEO and Director, Community Development. I think that's official now, isn't it? Yep, congratulations Alex Petrovsky, and Director James Hambley, who I think is also recently promoted to the executive team. And if the execs need help from any of their managers, no doubt they'll introduce them when the time comes. Okay, there's no apologies to take. Any disclosures of interest for tonight's items? No? No approved deputations. And I think any announcements from myself can wait until next week's meeting. So let's get into the officer reports, starting with C1, 49 Salisbury Street. Demolition of an existing dwelling and construction of 2-storey single house, including basement. Any questions on that item, councillors? Okay, item C2. Councillor Powell.
Yes, sorry, Mayor, I have a few questions about it. Look, through you to staff, the amount of overshadowing has been reduced even further in the latest iteration of plans, I think bringing it down to about 43% on the neighbouring property. But is there anywhere else in that area where you have that sort of level of overshadowing?
Mr. Denham, you're taking these questions, are you?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So Table 7 in the officer's report outlines a number of other properties that exceed the deemed to comply requirement. Exceeding the deemed to comply requirement, it doesn't really matter how much you exceed it by. You then look at the design principles to consider what areas are actually impacted. So that's what the report focuses on, and there's been some additional information that's been provided since December, when Council last considered it, as part of the overshadowing discussion to assist.
I was just wondering though, is 43%, you know, I appreciate what you're saying, but is 43% still, you know, sort of quite a high number? Even if it is not the determining factor, is it still quite a high number for properties in that area?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So Table 7 in the officer's report notes one property that's got 38% overshadowing of the adjoining property. So it's not too far away from that particular amount, and it is an east-west lot, which it is inherently difficult to meet the deemed to comply, even with a single-storey development.
If I may, through you, Mayor. Look, this is still on the overshadowing, and this is on the window in the neighbour's living room area. I think the report says that even at the winter solstice, that window will still have access, I think, to virtually 80% of sunlight. Now, taking a look at the photographs, it seems to me that the buildings are really quite close together. So I'm just wondering how it actually still achieves that sort of 80% even at the winter solstice. It's probably just me, but I just can't see how it actually works.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, so in the officer's report, it does identify that the window that's affected on the southern adjoining property is quite close to the boundary. So typically, it is an older house, but under the current standards, the setback would ordinarily be greater. The setback proposed by the proposed development still does allow for sunlight penetration to occur into that window.
Okay, thank you. Look, the other matter is, of course, is the, or part of it is the privacy. Especially concerns about, I think, the kitchen or the living room windows of the second story overlooking. How has that been dealt with, especially in regard, say, perhaps to the neighbouring property in Rupert Street?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So in relation to visual privacy, the development actually meets the deemed to comply standards, so it complies.
It's just that there appeared to be quite a concern that from some of the residents that that there would be visual access to their properties, their outdoor areas, especially from the upper floor, both I think from the main bedroom and from the ensuite. Are you saying that I think the cone of vision will not will mean that won't occur on the neighbouring properties?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. That's correct. So, I mean, just in relation to an ensuite, that's not subject to a visual privacy assessment because it's not a habitable room. And in relation to the master suite, which you're referencing, that meets the deemed to comply requirements in terms of setbacks. So it can't be refused on that basis.
And just one final one. This is in regard to the expansion of the creation of a basement. What about the concerns that the neighbouring house, I think, is 100 years old and it's on stumps? How is it going to be ensured that that excavation will not cause any damage to the neighbouring properties that are, quite old structures?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So one of the conditions that the city is recommending relates to dilapidation reports for the two properties either side on the same street. I guess regardless of that, and that aside, under the building legislation, there's an obligation for the relevant builder to make sure there's no detrimental impact on adjoining properties, and that's part of the building permit process.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions on the item? Okay, let's move on. Item C2, 126 Barker Road, Subiaco, a two-storey single house, including basement. Any questions on item C2? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just in relation to the street fencing, I note that the applicant is seeking 2.43 metres when the regular height is 1.8 metres for the front. Is this an unusual event, and are there any examples where a higher street fence has been granted to a DA before?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yes, so in relation to the street fence, I guess you're referring to the proposal includes a pedestrian kind of access gate from the front, which is the highest point. The city has done an assessment against it. We're not supportive of the fence in its current form against the streetscape policy, and we're recommending condition 10 addresses that it does meet the relevant policy requirements.
Thank you, and if I may, again, please, Mayor. In terms of the cone of vision, I'm understanding to the east it exceeds 4 metres, and to the west it goes 3.8 metres, and it is going to overlook the sensitive areas of the neighbours to the west Can you tell me what strategies are proposed, or what conditions, I should say, are proposed to mitigate that, please?
Yep, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So, I guess as part of the city's assessment, we did look at visual privacy, and as outlined in the officer's report, under section 5.4.1, it does go into detail about the western adjoining property in particular. There may be potential to overlook the rear backyard area. I think it's a trampoline, in-ground trampoline located there. Given the angle, it's quite an oblique angle, given the height of where the deck will actually overlook that area, it's potentially part of the existing fence may actually obstruct the direct line of sight. So we have got a condition in there and some advice notes to explain that to the applicant, that maybe screening may be required, but maybe not a larger solution. It's just the way the height of the deck is relative to the fence.
Thank you. And just one final question. Am I right in assuming that there's an unusual number of conditions being placed on this DA?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. No, for a single house of this nature, it's probably commensurate with other types of developments of this nature.
Thank you, and thank you, Mayor. I have no further questions.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I've got a couple of questions. How well does this design fit into the streetscape? There's been concern, I think, expressed by the residents in their submissions that it really isn't like any other home in the triangle. So, is the amenity of the streetscape and the neighbourhood, is that a planning issue with this application?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So I guess it has been considered against the city's policy in relation to the streetscape policy. The proposal was considered to satisfy the relevant standards and criteria associated with that. It has also been reviewed by the city's heritage department more broadly, not that there's any heritage significance necessarily for this building, but in terms of the streetscape more generally. So the proposal does achieve the requirements of the streetscape policy, and in addition to that, there is a condition recommending finish and materials be submitted prior to issue of a building permit, so that'll further improve the outcome if it is approved.
Look, I'd also like to address one of the comments in the proponent submission that, and that is, they say, as a result of family moving into the area, the need for modern day living standards require larger homes. Is that really what we're being faced with now? We have a city with quite small blocks, but are we really now having larger and larger homes built on small blocks? And is that the way that perhaps that we should be approaching it, looking at sort of large homes, small blocks?
Thank you. Through Mayor McMullen. The intent and purpose of larger families moving into the area isn't something that we can consider under the planning framework. So while that may be the particular case for the family, it's not something that can be considered in the city's assessment, which looks at our local planning scheme and the art codes. It may provide for ageing in place, and it may provide for additional family members to live there, but it's not something that's been assessed with the planning framework which applies.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's possibly a subject probably for a greater debate or greater look at policy at some stage, I think. Just a couple of functional matters. I think it's just under the ratio for the how large the house is compared to the block, but that doesn't take into account, does it, the pool building, the outside buildings? I mean, are they included, sort of in the plot coverage or not?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I think Councillor Powell, you might be referring to the outdoor living areas, not open space. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess with the outdoor living areas, the deemed to comply requirements for this, it needs to be 4 metres minimum dimension. Where their outdoor living area is, the minimum dimension is 3.41 associated with the rear terrace. And it also talks about a certain percentage that's uncovered by the roof. So it's different to open space calculations. Open space can be viewed differently, and it's more where building isn't on the site. But outdoor living areas is generally where it's attached to a living room and can be enjoyed. It's typically like an alfresco area. So yeah, there is discussion in the report why that's supported.
And 2 other ones, if I can. One is this also seems to be a very long parapet wall. So one question is about its length. I thought there was a maximum of about 10 metres or something for parapet walls, at least before there's a rebate. And 2, the likely impact of a wall that long, I think it's around about 35 metres on the neighbour's amenity.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So in relation to lot boundary setbacks, including boundary walls, the proposal was deemed to comply. So if it complies with the deemed to comply or meets those standards, it can't be refused on that basis.
So I suppose what I'm asking is the length of the parapet wall and the height of it, is that taken into consideration as an effect on the amenity of the neighbours?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So if it meets the requisite length and height requirements and average height requirements, and therefore it meets the deemed to comply, then it's taken to be acceptable in, I guess, all respects in terms of building bulk, etc.
Thanks, Councillor Powell. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you and good evening. Through you, thank you, Mayor. I am trying to understand the deep soil zones in this property. So can you point me, we've got a lot of attachments to go through, as you know, perhaps you can give me the numbered PDF attachment that highlights the deep water zones, deep soil zones, so we can just talk through it.
If you can just press your button, please, Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So as this application was assessed under the Residential Design Codes Volume 1, it doesn't necessarily require deep soil areas, but where it's a new house, as this is proposed, it's subject to requiring or providing for at least one tree, minimum dimension of 2 by 2 metres, which this does in the front setback area. So I don't have the plan number exactly. Yeah, I think it's page 12, but it's on the site plan and the floor plans in the kind of bottom right-hand corner, showing as a tree. There is another tree at the rear of the property, which is just shy of the dimensions, but it's not required to be provided under the R codes.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So are these trees in planter boxes?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So it's not identified as being in a planter box, but there is a condition of approval which requires, I guess, that tree to be provided. So there's no requirement to have it in a planter box under the R codes, if that answers your question.
Actually, I prefer that it wasn't in a planter box. So that's what I'm trying to understand. If we actually have, if we have a condition requiring a tree, surely it is a tree that's not going to have a short life in a planter box. I'm also trying to understand the back fence, because they talk about planter, and I didn't know whether it was how they were designed either. You know, I'm obviously thinking of water runoff. If this if this build is all concrete and all hard surfaces, it's going to be a, huge runoff.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So page 127 on the PDF page. Great. So that shows two trees. So the tree that we're talking about on the bottom right-hand corner is a feature tree. So that's not in a that's in the ground, and the tree to the rear, next near the pool and the pool house, given the levels, that one is proposed to be in a planter. So the tree that's not in a planter meets the requirements of the R codes.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. And what are those three black smudges over on the right in the back? Are they also planted box trees, or what are they meant to be?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. That looks to be just indicative planting.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. And there is an elevation to this block?
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, so the site drops approximately 2 metres from the street towards its rear, which is quite significant.
So how would they propose to actually, as you know, we've had some really bad storms and a lot of damage. How would they propose to actually contain water just filling up their fire pit and pool and everything else, just flooding the whole back area with that sort of gradient?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So pretty much every single residential development in Western Australia has a standard condition that says the stormwater is retained on site and captured. It's normally resolved through the building permit process. There's obviously obligations under there, and there's more detailed design that occurs. They look at calculations for runoff and the storage requirements in soak wells, etc. So that's done through the condition of approval, if it is approved, and resolved through the building permit process.
Thank you. So this might be a question for the other director, new director. I'm just wondering how they would be able to contain, when it's all hard surfaces and all totally landscaped in the back, how would that stormwater be contained? What's the usual system? Thank you.
Director Technical Services, I think that's one for you.
Thank you, and for you, Mayor McMullen. So typically in an instance like this, what you would normally employ would be something like a spoon drain at locations. So for instance, at the start of the driveway where the gradient starts, you'd also probably have entry spoon drains or similar channel drains at entry points, whether it's the garage or near steps and the like. So typically you'd have that, and that would probably feed into soak wells, which you could put in the soil underneath this property, because fortunately we do have quite a difference between our finish levels and our water table. So putting soak wells on the site would be, I would imagine, it'd be quite straightforward, despite all the hardscaping.
Thank you, through Mayor. And is there a requirement in the size of those spoon drains? You know, is that sort of consideration given to the actual size of them, in light of the, particular style of home build on the block, so on?
For you, Mayor McMullen. So it is something that is worked out, like Anthony mentioned. We work out calculations based on the Australian rainfall and runoff, which is our guide for developing that runoff calculations that will determine the volume that you need to store within the site to meet those standards. So that will be all assessed through that stage that Anthony's already mentioned.
Thank you. 12 years in the job and I'm still learning new things, but In this case, it hasn't been so obvious until the really heavy rain that we have had and the damage around the suburb. I would just like a better understanding of the front fence. Thank you. And why the need for it to be higher than what we would prefer under our regs. Thank you, through the Mayor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. There's certain elements of this fence as proposed that the city is not supportive of because it doesn't meet the streetscape policy. So we are recommending conditions of approval, condition 10, which limits the height of it, and it talks about having visual truncations and visual permeability above a certain height. So we weren't supportive of the fence as it was proposed.
Thank you. So it's been changed, but it's still not it's still not compliant. Is that what I'm understanding? But we have some sort of visuality through that style, although they're quite hard. I assume it's those posts that are on the slant. So it's the visual view is actually not that good, is it? It's a certain look that still gives it a very filled-in look. But I understand that's on the driveway, which is a double driveway, and then on the other side of the entrance gate with those small slots. It's just that there were two lots of pictures. I realised one was an amended plan and so on. So that's the one we're going with.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So what the condition of approval, as recommended, will do, will modify that fence that you're looking at. So that fence will change so it meets the intent of the policy and the requirements of the policy.
I might just ask a question before I go back to Councillor Powell. Look, it's just a general one. It might go to how these reports are written, but in relation to each of these areas where discretion's proposed, you've set out what is permitted, what is proposed, and in the variation column it says discretion sought. Where would I look to understand what officers are proposing by way of solutions where things aren't supported? Is it a matter of reading through the report where, for example, you've spoken about visual privacy and the fact that one of the on one of the sides it's not supported, and therefore you're proposing that that some screening might be put up. Is it a matter of piecing these things together, or is there somewhere in the report where I can kind of compare what's being proposed and what officers think might be a suitable compromise is?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. When preparing the reports, there are detailed attachments, and in this case, it's attachment 5. So what the report does is it considers the proposal on its merits, and where discretion is required, it provides a very short, well, not very short, but a short summary of that assessment. So in the executive summary in the background section, it says which parts require discretion, and then the body of the report details the assessment of the discretion against what is actually proposed by the application. There is much more detail in the attachments, but that makes the reports very lengthy and hard to read. And in those summaries against visual privacy, overshadowing and so forth, depending on the proposal, there is an assessment undertaken and justification as to why the discretion may or may not be supported.
Thanks. Look, there's just one more question from me in relation to visual privacy, and it's possibly quite a basic one, but it's about the concept of cone of vision. We're saying that the cone of vision exceeds 4 metres on the eastern side and 3.8 metres into the western side. But then the report goes on to say that there's a boundary wall which there's a boundary wall on the eastern side which is supported. There's a boundary wall on the eastern side, and as a result, the proposed variation is supported because there would not be any visual privacy impacts. I'm just trying to understand how there can be a cone of vision of 4 metres, yet a boundary wall somewhere within that cone of vision which protects visual privacy. So how do you reconcile cone of vision with the existence of a boundary wall, is my question.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So page 127 of the attachments actually shows that quite well. The cone of vision is a number and a figure that we are required to assess under the R codes. Now, in that cone of vision, if it extends over the property boundary, for example, there might be a physical wall there, so you wouldn't actually be able to see into the area where the cone of vision goes into the neighbouring property.
But isn't it the case that if there's a wall within the cone of vision, then you are in fact containing the cone of vision, or is that not how cone of vision works as a concept?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Essentially, yes, but we planners explain it in a long way where you have to draw the cone of vision and then you consider what's in there and the circumstances around it.
Okay, so the reason for my question is, we'll return to basic principles. The deemed to comply requirement is that the cone of vision must be contained within lot boundaries. How would one go about containing the cone of vision within lot boundaries if a boundary wall is not a way that you might do that?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMillan. I think on page 128, if you look at a different floor level, it has, or maybe it's 129, 129, it shows probably a good example to answer your question. So the further you're set back from the boundary, from an opening, it actually means that the cone of vision is further away from the boundary. So there are cases where there is overlap with the boundary from the cone of vision, but then you look at the impact it causes. So for instance, a balcony needs to be set back 7.5 metres from a boundary within the cone of vision. If it's not, then you look at what area is impacted within that space and beyond that. So there are ways of achieving compliance with the cone of vision by setting the building back.
That might need to be something I grapple with in the coming week. Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, I'm going back to page 127, and something that is probably not quite as intellectual. The swimming pool, the pump house, and the equipment, what's going to be done, because that seems to be right on the boundary where the equipment is going to be stored and probably the pump house. What's going to be done about protecting the neighbours from the noise of that?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMillan. So I guess ongoing compliance with those types of things, machinery, air conditioning equipment, pool house equipment is subject to the environmental noise regulations. So that would be subject to that and not necessarily planning.
Any other questions, councillors? Okay, let's go on to C3. You're not going to ask a question about C2, are you, councillor? No, good, okay. Go ahead. C3, 60 Bagot Road, Subiaco, change of non-conforming use from office to community purpose, mental health accommodation. Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMillan. If we can bear with me, I'm in my order. To start with, through you, to where you see it fit, my first question would be, the term that we're using for the change of use is community benefit, okay, really, the basis of it, okay, so, and what we're talking about is other organisations operating for, community benefit. So we're talking, the definition here of its use is described as community benefit. My first question would be, could the staff advise me of other uses inside, sorry, not community benefit, community purpose, okay? The description is community purpose, which then goes on to read, as it's applicable in this particular section, services by organisations involved in activities for a community benefit. Excuse my previous wording. But the actual land use is community purpose, and it's the last part of that sentence. The first part's not really relevant, but the last part, and I'll read it again, for services by organisations involved in activities for community benefits. Could I have some examples of other properties within the city, okay, that I could go by, have a look at, know of already, that would fall under the heading of being services by organisations involved in activities for community benefit?
I think most of these will be questions for the Manager Planning Services unless he wants to bump it up to the Director. Mr. Denham.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So when assessing the application, we needed to find a definition in our planning scheme which was most closely aligned to the use that was proposed. So that's why we have landed at the community purpose land use definition. And as I understand your question is, well, what other community purpose land uses do we have in the city? Would have. Yeah, that's something that we're going to have to take on notice and provide you some advice on. We wouldn't necessarily have a list of all that available on hand.
If you wouldn't mind pressing your microphone button to ask the question.
This is a little back and forward, Mayor McMullen, but the answer, I suppose I'll follow the response with a further question. I find it difficult to understand that the staff have chosen a land use, right, and can't off the cuff even give me one similar land use within the city, okay, that would fall into the same category that it's good. So is this the first, so is the answer, this is the first time we've ever had one? I mean, to say I have to take it on notice surprises me, because this is a pretty serious subject, okay, that we're going into. But if it has to be taken on notice and I'm going to get a list, I'd like the list well before the council meeting.
Okay, Councillor Burns. Well, as surprised as you may be at the answer, they've said what that answer is and that they've got to take it on notice. So I think all we've got to do is give them the time to give you the answer that you seek, and no doubt that will happen well in advance of next week's OCM.
Okay, my next question would be this. The paperwork before us talks about staffing, okay, and the staffing, we've got 5 residents and we have staffing up to 5, so basically like it's a one-on-one, and it says staff and volunteers, okay. The volunteers aside, looking at the staff, could I be advised, do any of the staff involved, right, are they medically qualified? Are they, I'm sure they're just not a bunch of secretaries, so I'm not being rude about secretaries, but and I'll follow that, there is a B part to that question, right? If they are medically qualified, are any of the staff able to dispense any sorts of drugs whatsoever that you can't buy over the counter?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. We can probably answer the second part of your question first. The management plan doesn't indicate the use of other medical substances, such as the administration of drugs or anything else on the site. So as that is a requirement of the condition of approval, that's something that can be subject to compliance, but it's not what is actually proposed by the land use. And Anthony will provide an answer for the staffing.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So there is information in the management plan, which is in one of the attachments to the report, that talks about the different staffing and the volunteers that are going to be operating from the proposed premises. They do talk about trained staff with mental health experience. That is quite clear in the management plan that it's not for, I guess, medical treatment. So there is people there to provide support to those that are in need.
Can I take that as a yes, there actually are trained medical people? Is that what you're saying? There are people that actually have medical training? I mean, you can know a lot about medicine, but is it even somebody as just a nurse? You know what I mean? Somebody that's a nursing degree. Not a doctor. I'll take the bottom of the, I'm not saying nurses are at the bottom of the ladder, excuse me, but let's just say, would there even be a nurse there? A psychologist, perhaps?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. When considering and approving a development or a land use, the city will not necessarily be going into the detail that a hospital ensures and checks that all the people working there are doctors and so forth. So through this application, it's noted that some of the staffing may have clinical qualifications. It would be up to the management body and the organisation running it in the Samaritans to ensure that the people who are using the operation in the facility are appropriately qualified and trained. So we would expect that there may be a number of staff who may be trained in a range of disciplines, whether that's in nursing or in psychology or doctors, but it's not something that we would necessarily enforce or check. There'd be other legislation that applies to those sorts of matters.
Okay, if I can continue through you, Mayor McMullen. Well, considering that answer, right, let's just presume there's a nurse and there's a psychologist, whether they're temporarily or they're there every day of the week, but just one or the other, right? And you're saying, from what I'm hearing, is in making a planning determination, that's not something you can look into. Where I'm having a hole here that I'm seeking an answer to, shouldn't it be something you're considering? Because aren't we now moving away from this community purpose, which is an organisation for, to community benefits, and heading a little bit more to a medical operation, okay, which I would suggest is far different than a community purpose. Now, in what you said at the end of it, it would then, it's a little bit like the answer we got a second ago about from Councillor Powell asking about noise from pool pumping equipment, saying, I agree 100% with you. If the pool pump makes too much noise, what happens is you call a different department, they come along and you've got to put something over your pool pump because it's annoying the neighbour. Well, your answer is almost the same. It's like, well, if they fill it up with doctors, we're going to come down and shut them down because they're now a hospital. Okay, that's what I would have thought, because they're no longer that wouldn't be defined under community purpose. They just stepped over it. They consult, is it a medical facility of some sort? Now, in saying that, we both know that, and this is still a question, Your Honour, before you jump on me, we both know there are multiple, A-class hospitals, day hospitals, all sorts of things, medical institutions. And I will go back to remind you and remind everybody here that hasn't perhaps had a look at it, but under the second paragraph, under our development proposal, we end up, excuse me, and I'll bring it up, the wording. The sanctuary will target the silent minority. Great, okay. Meaning young people who experience suicidal thoughts and behaviours, how often do not have a diagnosed mental health disorder? Well, we're getting, you don't need a diagnosed mental health disorder to be suicidal. I mean, the second part, the however...
Councillor Burns, I'm just struggling to find a question in here. So gather your thoughts and frame it as a question. We'll see if the staff can answer it.
Am I right in thinking that this is far closer to a medical facility than the use that the staff have deemed it to be, right, in wanting to change from what is right now is an office of non-conforming use, and they're actually picking a different name out of the land uses, and what we're talking about is something that is to my mind, a medical facility of some description to deal with people that have declared themselves to have suicidal thoughts or have undertaken suicidal behaviours. And that is a big difference, okay, than what I would say is a community purpose or whatever the name is. That's my question.
Mr. Petrovsky.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. There's a lot of information in that. However, what we have assessed, the use of this proposed change of use is consistent with the management plan, and that management plan suggests to us that it's for accommodation purposes for people who may be experiencing suicidal thoughts and behaviours. That was information provided in the management plan. Having a look at the use, community purpose is a land use that best fits under the land use definitions available to us in our scheme, and that's what you're required to do under the legislation. If elected members of council thinks that this is not a community purpose use, it can make that determination to define another land use. However, it's the officer's recommendation that what is proposed fits within community purpose, given the information in the management plan that it is for accommodation, and that the management plan needs to be adhered to as a condition of planning approval. The other interesting factor on this is that it is a new approach. It will be the first in Western Australia. So there are no precedents that we can go on, apart from what's in the management plan, how the facility is proposed to be used, and ensuring compliance with that management plan if it is approved.
Through you, Mayor McMullen. Well, that was going very well until, unfortunately, our new director scared the hell out of me when he finished off by saying this is a new approach, so it's a trial, and all things must be trialled, but I'd suggest trialling something, okay, in the concept, and I'm looking here, this is a question because I'm seeking your agreement, to trial something, okay, when we are doing a change of use. So we have a residential area, okay, with a non-conforming, albeit for 4 decades, office in it, okay? And the whole point of non-conforming use, which I know a little bit about, okay, and I think you do too, right, is you've got a non-conforming use here, okay, and you want to change it, you go down. Call it a lesser use, call it less invasive to the neighbours, right? But you go down the ladder, you don't ever go up the ladder in altering a non-conforming use. And I don't even need to seek your answer to that because you know it and I know it and everybody else knows it.
Councillor Burns, if you're not going to seek an answer, then I'd consider what you just said is not a question. So if you can just keep the questions on track, because there's other councillors waiting to ask their own questions. Okay, well, wrap it up. Wrap up that question. Frame it as a question, then we'll see what staff say about that. Okay, just press your button before you ask the question.
Am I correct in thinking you cannot intensify you know what I mean, a non-conforming use with a use that is more intense, you know what I mean, intensified.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I appreciate that this is an application which people have different opinions on. Under the local planning scheme, the local government can only grant development approval for a change of use in this instance where it's considered that the proposed use is less detrimental to the amenity of the locality and is closer to the intended purpose of the zone. So going from an office land use to a community purpose, our report has focused and considered that that is a less detrimental use to the amenity of the locality, and it's closer to the intended use of a residential zone. Now, it is open for council to have a different point of view. This is just the professional view of the officers and myself who have assessed this report. So it is open to council to consider the report and come up with its own recommendation and determination in this matter.
Again, through you, Mayor McMullen, would the staff acknowledge, or hope perhaps even agree, okay, that this particular one, look, and just, I know this is not a question, but I'm just going to make an explanation, all right? I am not...
Make it really short and snappy, Councillor Burns.
I'm absolutely in favour, okay, of anything that is helping young people and that sort of stuff, okay? However, we've got a problem here is in that we're trying to do it where I believe we're actually we're breaching the town planning rules. This is not about the use. I have no problems with the use. So let's go back to the question. Okay, I'm just letting you know this is not me having a problem with what's going on. It's a wonderful use. However, I don't believe in doing things, okay, where somebody buys next door to an office and then it can be intensified. And I believe there's an intensification issue here. And I would also, so my question is this, right? Am I wrong in thinking, okay, that where staff have drawn a line and where staff have gone looking for a similar, lesser use and come up with community purpose, right? The correlation here, right, is you've got one, next door, you got all around it, you got residential, which has got beds and people living in it, okay? And then you got an office. Well, sure, they're different. You've got apples and oranges. But what we're going to do is change the office, and this is still a question, we're going to change the office to a residence, because it's going to have beds in it, it's going to have a kitchen in it, okay? And that obviously, as you look at it, looks more like what's around it, people living inside a building. But what I'm seeking agreement is, the difference is what we're not looking at and where the use fails, in my opinion, right, is that, sure, there's beds in it, people are eating in it. The problem is, I believe it's actually a medical facility, okay? And a very serious medical facility. Like,
So that's a repeat of a previous question, isn't it? And the question would be, is this a medical facility? And I think we've heard the answer to that question. I mean, ask the question, but if you're going to repeat the previous question, I think we know the answer, and we're probably not going to want to hear too many more opinions at this point, Councillor.
Last question. Okay, in the city of Subiaco, okay, a list of community purposes, okay, that I can compare this to, as opposed to comparing it to a bunch of hospitals I'm going to compare it to. So when am I going to get it the night before? Can I have it tomorrow? I mean, we must have lots of them.
Thanks, Councillor. Mr. Petrosky, how soon can you pull that list together?
Thank you, and through you, Matt. Look, we'll work to review that in the next day or so we can provide it before the weekend. What I would say is that this is not generally to be compared with other land uses in and around the area. It's to consider the application on its merits and what has actually been proposed. So that's what the planning requirement and the framework requires, not so much to compare what other things might be going on in other areas. It's about what's proposed in this actual application. But we will provide that to you with the information we find most likely by the end of this week.
Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. And just to add, to try to hopefully give some clarity around what Councillor Burns was saying, as I understand it, this proposed land use is a first for the city, and there is probably no comparable change of land use in the city before or across the metropolitan area for that matter. So staff have conceded that, and I thank them for that. However, it leads one to ask, how confident are staff that the risk management strategy, as set out in the approved management plan, will in fact be adequate to respond to all known risks and unforeseen circumstances?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, a risk management strategy needs to consider the risks that they can fairly and reasonably list and provide some risk mitigation measures to those. So we're confident that that will be in place. It's very difficult for the city or the staff to consider any unforeseen risks, as you mentioned, because they're unforeseen. But much like any other property in the city or in Perth or in WA, there are other measures and other things that can be done if they're a nuisance and so forth. So you have the environmental regulation measures for noise, and there can be compliance in line with that. And if there is bad behaviour or criminal activity, that's the police. Whether this is a residential a building, whether it's a single house, an office use, if things are untoward, there are other codes that govern these sorts of measures.
Thank you for that, Mr. Petrovski, and with another question on the same vein, if I may, please. In terms of your due diligence, did you happen to look at the fact that the clientele or the patients attending the centre will be aged between 16 and 24? I presume they'll be both sexes. In terms of institutionalised care and duty of care, there seems to be, is that legal? I mean, we've got people under the age of 18 with people as old as age 24. I mean, it's something that no doubt it's not part of the planning consideration, but it may be something to take up with the proponents of the plan.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Look, we'll take that information on board. My initial thoughts are 1 to 16, as per state government requirements, that you may be classified as an adult from then onwards, but we'll take that information on board. The other part is that the state government is contributing funding to this model, so one would consider that they have understood all the regulatory requirements and risks regarding such facility.
Thank you, Mr. Petrovski, I appreciate that. And the next question, if I may. While appreciating the different perspectives surrounding this proposal, is it nevertheless fair to say that the proposed land use is more detrimental than the existing office use? One also needs to ask, how is it linked to the residential zone?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, the officer's report sets out that it's our opinion that the community purpose use is less detrimental to the amenity of the the locality and closer to the intention of the residential zone. So the report, and I won't go through it all, but it does consider all the zone objectives and why we've come to that opinion. So the answer to your question pretty simply would be no. We consider that this to be less detrimental to the amenity of the locality and closer to the residential zone.
Thank you for that. And just the final question, and this is probably a difficult question, I know, but and I appreciate where staff are faced with this, but are staff confident they have not exceeded their legal authority? In other words, are they ultra vires in recommending approval of this in terms of it being a non-conforming use, that is from office to community purpose in this particular instance?
Look, the CEO wants to answer that, and I'm sure I can preempt the answer, and it's going to be that staff wouldn't recommend that council take a course of action which is ultra vires. But CEO, what did you want to add?
Beautifully answered. That was going to be my answer. So, look, we take our best endeavours to provide our staff recommendation using our best judgment, but once council meeting starts next week, that is up to council to consider, or the elected members individually, and then council to make a decision, and that decision will absolutely be lawful, and obviously there's rights of appeal and all those other, or review, etc., but it is council's responsibility to form a view in terms of the question that you've asked, but staff assessment is that they consider that to be similar to, or of a similar nature in terms of residential. And just to answer the other question in terms of 16 to 24, there is many examples across the state, and that is an ordinary type age for youth in relation just to ordinarily youth housing as well, and at-risk youth. So that is pretty standard across probably Australia.
Thank you for that. And the question was stemming from the fact that we've got people in the room, in the audience tonight, who have got a particular interest on those aspects of it, so I'm pleased to raise that.
Councillor De Vries.
It's through you, Mayor. This is a three-part question, so I'll just put them all in one to keep it brief. First is, it looks to me back on the 27th of October 2022 that this would be a pilot project, which I haven't really read that into the officer's report, but I presume there is some pilot element to it. If so, for how long? The next part is that the Maytree model on which this is based, from my readings, it looks as if it has a 20-year track record in the UK, which has been highly successful, based on very similar type of intervention, which is fantastic to hear. So that's the next one. Is it indeed based on that? And if so, is it a very similar model in that it's, the housing facility and so on? And the third part is, look, one can only but note the fear in the community about hearing about youth mental health. Let me tell you, as someone who has worked in this field for a number of years, there are so many people who are crying out for help who simply can't get it. Is it possible, if we're looking at this with the community, just because people have those thoughts doesn't actually mean that they're off the scale and leading to sort of suicidal behaviours, but certainly the idea that we provide a lot of reassurance, and is it possible for there to be some mediation between RUA and the community to ameliorate some serious concerns which are really evident, because we only have a few facilities in WA, and I think the Bentley Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service is the one that has beds for really extreme cases, 12 beds. But this is obviously quite a different facility. So is there some way we can have a community information process that would really inform the community a little bit more about this facility? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the first question was about whether or not this is a pilot program. So it is a pilot program as per their model. Now, there is an option available to council should it consider approval of time limiting the approval, if they would like to, if an elected member and council would like to do that, noting that that pilot model might be provided for 3 years or 5 years or some sort of time limit. that could provide council some guarantees or security into the future. Your second question was about the Matrix model, and yes, it is based on the Matrix model that has been successful overseas. And the third one was about information by RUA, and we can be in touch with RUA both through the planning and the community development teams to see what type of information and sessions that we can provide to interested community members with regard to some of the issues that we deal with in and around local government.
I'll just ask a couple of questions. You finished, have you, Councillor De Vries? Yep. Firstly, the classification of the proposed use, how did that come about? Because there's been a bit of talk about staff finding a land use which, in your view, best describes what is proposed on this site. But would it not be the case that the applicant would have proposed that classification in their development application?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, in the applicant's proposal, they classified the use as a residential building, but it is up to the decision maker to consider the use on its merits with the land use definitions. So we can provide you, subsequent to this meeting, more information about the classification of that of the land use.
So the applicant attempted to classify this as a residential development?
Through you, Mayor, no, it's a residential building, which is different to a single house or normal house where someone would reside. It's actually got a different land use definition in the planning scheme. I can grab it for you now.
So under the local planning scheme, a residential building defers to the residential design codes, in which the definition is a building or portion of a building, together with rooms and outbuildings separate from such building, but incidental thereto, such buildings being used or intended, adapted or designed to be used for the purpose of human habitation temporarily by 2 or more persons, or permanently by 7 or more persons who do not comprise a single family, but does not include a hospital or sanitarium, a prison, hotel or motel or a residential school. So that was what the applicant sought to classify this land use as, and we took a different view on that.
Thanks for clarifying. My other question just relates to this idea that the community purpose is closer to the intent of the residential zoning of the land than what an office would be. And my questions relate to table 4, which is at page 39 onwards of my agenda. So there's a number of, almost all of the elements listed under the existing office use were stated as not satisfied, and they're not satisfied for the reasons stated. You know, a lot of those elements relate to built aspects of the building that's currently on the site. So if for example at point D the existing building doesn't maintain compatibility with the general streetscape, and your advice is that that is currently the case, that it doesn't maintain compatibility with the streetscape at present, isn't that still going to be the case if the proposed use is allowed? I mean, should it not be the case that most of what is currently not satisfied will continue to be not satisfied under the change of use if it proceeds?
Thank you, Mayor. And through, it's a comparative assessment. So in that case, there is the proposal, and there's a condition recommended to enforce it, would be to remove the commercial signage at the front of the premises. So comparatively, it would be returning the building to looking and feeling more like a residential premises.
Okay, we'll take that advice on face value. Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. Look, I'd very much like to hear a little bit more about the potential for this being a pilot, that whether any approval could be conditional over a period of time. Can you explore that a little bit further? Because there have been concerns, I think, expressed by residents, nearby residents, not just about the plan that's been submitted as it is, but what may happen in a few years' time if there's a change in ownership of that property. Could you please go a little bit further into how that would actually work?
Thank you. And through you, Matt, I think there's two parts to the question. The first question is about time-limited approval. So under the regulations and our planning scheme, council, if it thought was appropriate, could determine that this approval lasts for 2, 3, 4, whatever time period it comes up with, for example. And the second part of the question is in regards to if a new operator comes along and then starts using it in a different way, which I understand some concerns are about, and they are clear concerns, which is absolutely fine. The link to its use is in the condition of use in the management plan. So if the use was not being used, or if the place was not being used consistent with the management plan, there'd be enforcement measures that we could undertake under the Planning and Development Act to ensure that the use is used as what was approved.
So just to be clear, then any change would not be about simply about the building itself, about the use of the building itself. It would be about the use in that building conforming with the plan that's been put forward. Is that essentially the breakdown?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Yeah, so compliance will be ensuring that the building is used as per the management plan, and if there was ever to be a change, that would need to be an application that would have to come to the city.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, Mayor. We do have, I think, another example of a non-conforming use that was changed. What I'd like to know from staff was what was the new category that it was given. And this is the change of Ronald McDonald House from a residential housing to Fresh Start. Can the staff answer me on what actually was the change of use for that particular example? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, it might take us a couple of minutes, and if not, we'll get back to you on that. All the land uses in our scheme are going through my mind. I just don't want to give you the wrong one.
I believe it is. There is some relevance and consideration, particularly when we've been talking about whether the new use is going to be detrimental in comparison to the past use. Many residents in that area would argue that the change to use of Fresh Start was definitely a detrimental change. Despite that, everything has settled down. My question is, in the last year or so, and I'm only putting it in the last year because I know there's a lot of new staff around, have there been any complaints of Fresh Start by local residents?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. From my recollection, not from a planning perspective. We will need to check whether there have been complaints from potentially building or health or other parts of the city. So we'll need to get back to you from that. But from my recent recollection for planning, there haven't been any.
I might just ask a question off the back of that. Director, we've heard that, you know, we assess these things on their merits, and I think we know that. I'll ask the question now. You know, you've advised us that we determine these applications on their own merits. Would it somehow be improper or legally incorrect for us to look at other lived examples around the city and to extrapolate that what's happened on one site may or may not happen on this site? Because to my mind, we've got no crystal balls that we can look into, but we can look at other development around the city.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, the clause in our local planning scheme provides the best guidance in considering this matter, and I'll read the second part of it. It's quite clear. It's on page 37. It is in the opinion of the local government the proposed use. So in considering what is actually proposed, you would need to consider the information at hand in the management plan or the material that's been submitted, and that would be the primary assessment you would need to undertake. I don't think there will be significant issues in considering how other facilities operate, but you would need to consider that this is something very separate to those, and it is a new model, albeit you may have some experience. But my advice to elected members and council is to consider the merits of the application on what is proposed, and in the end, it's the city's and the council's consideration in its opinion. So it could come to another opinion contrary to what the city officers have recommended.
You're still looking for the answer to Councillor Stroud's question?
That was a very complicated matter, so I don't really want to give incorrect information. From memory, it was to do with the lodging house and the manner in which the lodging house was used, because it was a non-conforming use lodging house, and I think the question was whether or not it retained non-conforming use rights if it had ceased operation for 6 months or longer. So I don't think it was a change of use. I think it was considering whether the non-conforming use rights still applied to that site, and if it was continually used for, if it was not continually used for more than 6 months.
Yes, thank you. You could well be right on that. It does ring a bell about the 6 months. However, there was consideration of whether it was a medical facility, whether drugs would be administered and so on, and therefore I feel it's very relevant to our present consideration. So I'll leave it at that. I'd just be interested in what information you can recover. Thank you.
Councillor White, I see your hand's been up for a while. Greetings.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm coming in remotely. Thanks for the opportunity to ask a couple of questions, if I may. I just want to, I'm afraid I'm not understanding the management plan as such. I see that the staff have, there's been a back and forth with the proponents about the management plan and changes were made. I'm kind of trying to understand why. And by that, I mean, what rights of enforcement do we have on the management plan? If we're asking for changes to it, as we have, and they've come back with changes, now we've got a proposal, and if we, as the director said, we take on the merits of the case, essentially based upon what's in the management plan, how can we enforce that? There's a few sort of sub-questions here. Can we enforce it? What happens if it's changed? it refers to the code of conduct, and yet the management plan says a code of conduct will be developed. So my reading of the management plan says, does it contain a code of conduct? And that seems a bit strange. So I guess I'm trying to understand the importance and the I guess degree of authority of the management plan, and whether it has to be complied with fully in the years to come.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So condition 2, as recommended by staff, references the management plan dated 12th of January 2023, and we are recommending that it be amended to include a code of conduct, a critical response plan, and also further information regarding some handover procedures to be consistent with the number of staff on premises at any given time. And it goes on to say that the approved management plan, as amended by the 3 points above, is to be implemented in its entirety and adhered to at all times for the lifetime of the development to the satisfaction of the city. So condition of approval is enforceable under the Planning and Development Act.
Sorry, what does the last, through you, Mayor, what is the last bit? Implausible? I don't understand the last sentence.
Sorry. A condition of approval is enforceable under the Planning and Development Act. So if they're in breach of a condition of approval, they're in breach of their planning approval.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, if I may, how do we know if they've breached? You know, do you go out and inspect it? If you do you do that every 6 months, every year? How do you enforce that?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. There are a number of ways that it can occur. It can occur through inspections that the city undertakes. So it's got powers under the planning scheme and legislation to enter land and make inspections. Sometimes that can be done randomly. Sometimes that can be done generally within local government. It's done on a complaints basis. So if there's an issue raised by a member of the community, then that those issues can be raised confidentially, and then city officers can go in and inspect the premises and to understand how that's used. This is regularly done throughout the city.
Okay, thank you. If I may just have 1 or 2 more questions, Mayor. Just again for clarification, I understand 300 young people and their families a year would use the facility, and it would take 6 young people at a time. So that means around about 50 rotations in a year. Is that what you'd expect?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So I think it's up to 300, and there's a limit of up to 5 residents on the premises at any one time.
So that would be about 60 rotations a year.
Potentially. So I guess the length of stay, it can't be for longer than 5 consecutive calendar days or 4 nights. So it could be less than that. I think it would depend on the outcome of the progress of that particular resident.
Okay. And if I may, just 2 more quick questions. In response to questions about parking and not quite traffic, but that kind of thing in the officer's report, it sort of suggests that there won't be any movement in the evening times coming or going. Does this mean that residents are essentially locked in? They can't come and go as they please once they're in there for their stay? Because, as I say, there are certain suggestions where it says that they'll only be dropped off and picked up at certain times of the day. But I would have thought they would be allowed to move about. Am I wrong?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So as per the management plan, I guess the applicants advise that the pick-up and drop-off will only occur between 9 and 4 p.m, and that would be recommended as a condition of approval to make sure that happens. I haven't seen anything to say that wouldn't occur other than what the applicants advised.
No, excuse me, but just through, I understand that. My question is, once they're there, are they not allowed to come and go?
Yeah, thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I don't suspect they're going to be locked in the premises, if that answers the question.
Okay, so we could expect movement in the evening by people in and out of the facility.
Yeah. Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMillan. I mean, it would be typical of a residential property for that to occur. The management plan does talk about, quiet procedures, particularly outside of buildings or outside of this particular building, which would have to be adhered to.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the last question, well, sorry, two more, two more very quickly. The Maytree UK example does look like a very good one, but do we know of any issues about how they managed community concerns? Was the local government very involved in the Maytree facility in the UK? I do see that the management plan contains a complaints process, but I'm just interested in, if Maytree looks like a very good example, and it does look like the example from which this is being developed, do we know much about that in relation to the issues that we're talking about here?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I don't think we would be able to understand what other local governments have done in different jurisdictions, just because the framework is substantially different in those areas. So we have read about the Maytree model. We understand that it is a leading model in suicide respite, and we don't know how the other local governments have managed it. Again, this is a pilot project in Western Australia and Australia.
Okay, thank you. And last question, if I may, Mayor, just on the options in the officer's report on page 42, there are the three options which are largely standard, I guess. I just wonder whether it would be worth, if there's any revision being made to the officer's report for next week, that maybe a fourth option could be included, which responds to Councillor Powell's question, in terms of there could be approval with a review in 12 months.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, that's actually captured as option 1B. So council could approve the development application with different or no conditions. So if an elected member was considering an amendment to this, it could come through to have a time-limited approval.
Okay, thank you.
Noting, and I think the other part of it is why officers didn't recommend this this condition is because it would then revert back to the non-conforming office use previously, should that time lapse and not be extended.
Councillor Burns, you had your hand up before.
Yes, I just think it needs to be said. Don't get panicky, it's not a question, Mayor McMillan. It's just...
The question's what we're looking for, Councillor Burns.
My question's this: you raised at the beginning of the meeting if anybody had a conflict of interest. I didn't announce one, but seeing Fresh Start has been had attention drawn to it, I would like the meeting to note that I'm a board member of Fresh Start. So I don't believe there's a correlation between Fresh Start and this particular deal, but it was raised.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. Yeah, you wouldn't have preempted that this item would have led us into a discussion about Fresh Start, and given that technically the standing orders don't apply this evening, I think you've done the right thing to simply raise the issue now. Maybe we'll talk later about whether we think there's a need to formally submit an impartiality declaration before the OCM. Any final questions? Okay, I think we're finished with Council C3 then. The next item, C4, final approval to gazette our new waste local laws. Any questions about C4? Councillor De Vries.
I love talking rubbish. So through you, Mayor, just a couple of questions regarding this. I know it's going through and it's obviously just to clarify, but just in terms of community interest might be piqued by me talking about this. But there was exemptions is mentioned as something that community could put forward an exemptions request. In terms of what could they be exempt from, is that possible to clarify? I know you're not going to put that into the waste local law, but I'm just curious to know what that would be. And the second question was point 31B, ensure that each receptacle is kept in good condition and repair. And I think I've raised this before, but I have concerns about, older community members being expected to wash these big FOGO bins, that it's actually quite difficult and it could be quite hard to do that. Is it possible that we consider how we're going to support those cleaning of the bins? And because obviously a fine isn't a great idea because people aren't doing it because they don't want to. It's just because it's too difficult. Okay, they're my two simple questions. Thank you.
Director, Technical Services.
Thank you for you, presiding member. So just to touch on the last part of your question first. So as and you're right, this has been workshopped quite extensively with council. And as we have stated, typically that is an option of last resort. Obviously, we'll seek other options at our discretion before we would seek to infringe anyone for anything to do with the receptacle or other matters that are raised in the draft local law. So again, it's unlikely that would be used often, and ideally not at all if possible. So that's really that. And then which section, sorry, did you refer to as far as the exemption?
2.8, I think. Exemptions was 2.8, I think. Was like you can be exempt from, I don't know, maybe putting your bins out or something. I don't know exactly what.
Yeah, so obviously it is exemptions for relatively banal things such as that. So if they don't need to present the bins, or there's probably a couple examples, and if you like, if you really want to, I could provide some examples of this, of what that might entail. I probably can't cite them right now, but it'd be fairly banal things like that.
Councillor Stroud.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. My understanding is that if the bin is damaged in any way, the onus is only on the resident or business owner to notify the council, and that then the council will then replace the bin. They're not expected to mend the bin at all, just to notify them to have it replaced. Is that correct?
For you, presiding member, yes, that is correct.
The next issue, there's reference to a bin not weighing any more than 70 kilograms. I assume that's because it would create a lot of wear and tear on the truck mechanism, maybe on the bin itself. How would you know? Is it like, what would be the weight of a normal bin full of residual waste, for example? If no construction waste and all the things that shouldn't be in there.
For you, presiding members, so obviously we do have sensors on the lifting arms of all our trucks, and obviously that's what can alert us to if we have something's overweight. Obviously the weight of a bin can vary, but obviously anywhere up to 70 kilos is acceptable and permissible. But obviously typical general waste would probably be a fraction of that, probably half. Yeah.
But probably just to round that out, the usual practice would be that if the lift can't happen because it's too heavy, we'd notify them. They'd usually take the bricks out or whatever it is that's heavy in there, and that we'd be able to come back and pick it up later.
That was my next question, that what happens is the bin is left full and a notice is given so that the owner has an understanding of what's happened. There's one final comment, more than question, but I'll try and put it in a question. wouldn't it be appropriate in the bulk of the law, you do mention hazardous waste, and you mention non-collectible waste, and hazardous goes into non-collectible. I get that. But I just feel it would be useful in the index, I'll say, wouldn't it be useful in the index to actually have a definition of hazardous waste, or with perhaps a reference to Schedule 1 and non-collectible, or whatever? It just seems an oversight to me. I'll leave it to you.
For you, presiding member, I take your point. I would probably just say that making such a change is probably not required because it is still fairly clear through that and also other laws, typically what constitutes hazardous waste, including what's listed in Schedule 1, like you refer to. And this is following the Walga template and the D-word template as well. So just to remind councillors, this is the definitions and breakdown as recommended by the Department of Waste and Environment for this kind of use. So I would suggest that we probably don't need to make any more changes to the definition of hazardous waste if the State Department is quite comfortable with it as well.
Any final questions?
Another one that's actually not defined, and that is sewerage. Non-collectible waste means, and we're talking about Schedule 1, point H, sewerage, and point K, and or gives an offensive or noxious odour. Here I'm thinking about, sorry, I've been embedded in them today, pooey nappies and disposable nappies. So how does that actually mean that you cannot put a disposable nappy in the bin? Thank you.
For you, presiding member, no, that's not the case. And I believe there's actually a very clear definition about what sewerage is under water laws as well, which is enforceable by both Water Corp and other authorities. So that'd be the reason why we probably don't go into further detail as far as what constitutes sewerage in this circumstance.
Thank you, but I just can't imagine any other sewerage that could get into a bin, and that would be very pertinently very relevant, and that is poo in a nappy, and urine and poo in a disposable nappy. So I'm just wondering, is that acceptable, and therefore is the word sewage there confusing?
For you, presiding member, so again, nappies and the like, general household waste would be fine under the local law as proposed, and sewage would be well and beyond what we're talking about here. So I don't see that as a particular issue as far as clarification.
Well, then let's move on to point K, where it says waste that is likely to become offensive or give an offensive or noxious odour. Once again, I relate back to disposable nappies.
I think if you close the nappy up, it's not going to be noxious in terms of its waste or smell. And once we go to, certainly once we go to waste to energy, I'm sure they'll do well in that process.
Final questions? Okay, I think we've covered C4. C5, removal of policy 4.8, rodent control. Okay, no questions about that item. C6, the tender for provision of building maintenance and repairs. C7, business plan investments. Councillor Stroud.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Look, apologies if I've missed it, but, or perhaps I'll just confirm it in this way. This particular business plan falls into the directorship of the Director of Corporate Services. Would that be right? And I just felt it would be appropriate that it was also very much managed by the CEO, and I just wondered, is there an oversight by the CEO in this matter, and how have those controls been put in place, if at all? Thank you.
So probably I'll have a go at this, and then perhaps Joel, if you want to add anything further. But essentially, this is really the first part of the process by advertising a business plan and articulating over the long term to try and shift our investment portfolio away from just cash and commercial property to a more balanced portfolio, something similar to the Australian Future Fund. We've got a long way to go. We haven't got the mechanisms in place by which we'd be able to put the risk and reward and all those types of elements and the mix of investments through a proper process to inform council to sort of allow council to determine its risk appetite and the reward appetite. So there's a fair bit of work to be done through that. And then the actual mechanism by which eventually investments would be placed, once again, that would come part through to council, as well as to how we're going to physically manage those type of transactions and the mechanisms in place by which the CEO is involved, directors involved, managers involved, and staff are involved. So that would come through as well. So council had clear oversight as to how that would occur, and then that process ordinarily, or the policies and procedures and ways in which we manage that, would be subject to the internal audit function as well, to review and make sure that there's adequate controls in place. And likewise, given the substantial nature of our investment portfolio, the Auditor General's at year-end financial statements audit also would consider the appropriateness as well of those controls to ensure that the valuations each year were in accordance, were properly recorded. So there is a long way to go. There'd be a lot of oversight, etc. And if council formed the view that they felt that there needed to be more rigour, etc., or they wanted some sort of review before we proceeded, we can do all those things as well. So the intention is that this is sort of just the first process to legislatively allow for these types of investments, but we certainly won't be placing those investments in the very short to near term. We'd need to bring this process through for council to be confident in that regard. Hopefully that answered the question. But yes, certainly CEO, director, manager, staff, all those controls that need to be in place to manage that. But that's a fair way down, and we'd need to describe that and map that out for elected members, and as I said, subject to audit, etc.
I'll just ask a quick question, CEO. The officer recommendation says that council would be authorising the CEO to commence the major trading undertaking. Is that technically correct, that we're authorising you to commence the major trading undertaking, or is the truth of the matter more in line with somewhere later in the report where it says that this is just the first step with any change to the investment mix subject to future council decisions?
If I can, it's sort of the peculiarities of Section 359 business plan, which essentially means that council can resolve to proceed or not to proceed. That's what you're doing. So the intention here is to say, yes, we're proceeding with the business plan. Practically, we're not in a position to actually commence after you resolve, if council would resolve to proceed, because we haven't done all those other things, and we don't have the delegations in place, and we don't have all the requirements that I just described to the Deputy Mayor. So in a practical sense, we're not proceeding right now. We need to put all those things in place before we would be in a practical sense to commence with the business plan. But this is just saying from this date on, once we've done all those other things, in terms of Section 359 of the Local Government Act, we're able to proceed.
So essentially, we're adopting a business plan and therefore commencing the major trading undertaking in that sense. It is very confusing. Any other questions? Yeah, so C7's about the business plan investments. Okay, well, Councillor De Vries, everyone else has had the opportunity. Did you have any questions about C7? Right. Let's go to C8, financial statements and reports for the month ending 30 November 2022. C9, financial statements and reports for the month ending 31 December 2022. Okay, well, there's no other items on tonight's agenda, so I declare the City of Subiaco Council Agenda Briefing Forum of 14 February 2023 closed at 7:15 p.m. Thanks, Councillor, for all your questions.